Hello, everybody. Good morning/afternoon. 1 minute till afternoon. I say good morning all day, most of the time. My name is Victoria Blair. I am the Assistant Director of Financial Aid, and I'm very happy to be here with you all today because I'm talking about CPOS, which stands for Course Program of Study. If you haven't heard of it, that's not good, but that's why I'm here. There's a lot of confusion when it comes to that topic, a lot of myths and misconceptions I hope to straighten out today, and I will have some time for questions at the end as well. So, first of all, course program of study, the regulations behind it, lawmakers initially put it into place to improve graduation rates, to keep students on track, to keep them from taking a whole bunch of extra stuff and staying in school forever. So it had some good intentions behind it, but it does get complicated when it comes into advising and planning that far ahead and the financial aid processing on the background as well. So, the types of aid that CPOS affects are the federal and state aid. It's always been well, not always, it had a start point, but federally it's been in place longer than state, but Tennessee adopted it as well a couple years ago. So any student who has federal or state types of financial aid could be affected by it. A key difference is the institutional aid from Carson-Newman. So we're talking, you know, the merit academic scholarships, athletic scholarships, departmental endowments, just to name a few. Those are not part of this CPOS structure, and I'll go into more detail on that in just a minute. But when we look at financial aid, we are looking at students' enrollment status. Less than half-time, half-time, three-quarter time, and then really the key one is full-time. That's what we go for, right? So institutional aid, Carson-Newman scholarships require full-time attendance. So that's 12 to 17 hours. The federal and state aid maximum amount is full-time, but they do prorated amounts for three-quarter time and half-time. So that's the major component that we look at adjusting when it comes to the CPOS enrollment status. So a bit about the process prior to every semester and then also after the add drop deadline for each semester. Financial aid, usually me, I run the course evaluations for every student's every program. The system is a magical thing, and it does the report for me of telling me whenever a student's total registered hours and their hours that count toward their programs don't line up. That's when I reach out to Jessica, who has been a saint to getting the program fixed on the registrar side. And that's also when I may be reaching out to you all as students advisors when a student thinks a class should be counting and it's not. You know, we're all here for the student's best interest. I do not like being the bad guy taking students' aid away, so that's why we're here to talk about the nitty-gritty and also why we have so much communication leading up to that add drop date. That's why sometimes a student will get worried about an email they receive, but it's better to get a little worried on the front end, get it squared away, than us taking aid away on the back end. So really appreciate all of you guys. Your role in advising is so crucial, and I just first of all want to say thank you. So once we reach that add drop date and there are still issues, say a student is enrolled in 12 hours but only 9 are counting toward their program, at that point adjusting students' aid is an individual and manual process. We adjust their budget and their aid down to whatever that 9-hour amount would be. So here's the main goal. The main goal all the time is that students are enrolled in at least 12 hours per semester in required courses. Okay? I'm going to start with some myths and misconceptions now, and I'll work in my talking points through there, and then I will also give you some tips and tricks on moving forward. So number one myth that I hear, and all of these I've personally heard from either students, faculty, staff, or all three. So number one myth is that financial aid cuts off at 120 hours. That is not true. Not true. Some of you may remember when the Hope Scholarship did have a 120-hour mark. That's no more. Whenever the state switched to CPOS, that's what they're looking at. As long as the student is still here and enrolled in courses they need to graduate, financial aid, doesn't matter if they're over 120 hours. If they're in required courses, they'll still have aid. If they're still full-time, they'll still have institutional aid. Okay? The second myth is that students cannot take more than 12 hours per semester, or else they'll, run out of classes by the end. This is also not true. Sometimes it can be if you have a student coming in with a lot of dual enrollment hours, or if they're transferring to Carson-Newman, they've transferred in with a lot of hours. On those, it takes a little more strategy, a little more planning ahead to lay everything out. But in general, full-time is 12 to 17. Students are charged the same rate, 12 to 17 hours. They have the same financial aid, 12 to 17 hours. We do not want to limit them. And we all know we have overachievers. We have students who enjoy learning. They enjoy taking the random elective or taking classes toward their minors. We are not discouraging taking more than 12 hours. The key is just to have 12 hours of requirements toward that degree program. They can take 13, 14, 17 additional, they can stack on top as long as they're reserving 12 of requirements per semester. Okay? So that kind of already shifts into the third myth, is that there's no point in adding a minor, and we should discourage students from adding minors. Not true. Yes, most of you probably already know, adding a minor does not add hours to their degrees. It doesn't add program requirements. Minors themselves do not count under CPOS. However, they do count as general elective hours. So a lot of times those minor hours are counting toward the 12 if they have room in general electives. But there are also programs who don't have a lot of electives in their departments, or maybe none. So as long as the student is in 12 hours of requirements, and maybe that's part of the general electives, and maybe it's not, they can go over that and still get that minor that they want. Fourth myth is that students must, if they are seeking an associate's degree, that they must complete it first without declaring a bachelor. This is not true. Another helpful discovery we made a few years ago is that the federal regulations for CPOS, as well as our system, allows for 2 degrees to be declared at once. An associate's and a bachelor degree program can both be active at the same time. That way, whenever a student is, whether it's a scheduling conflict or just has to draw out the associates a little bit, they can go ahead and be taking courses toward their bachelor degree as well, and all of those hours will count under CPOS because I run degree evaluation on both of those programs at the same time. One key distinction is Tennessee Promise. That is the only scholarship that is specific to an associate's degree program, and the hours for Tennessee Promise funds do have to be associate degree hours. So whenever you have, the freshmen coming in, sophomores, they still have to try to be full-time with associate program hours. However, once you get to those later semesters where it's harder to get it in, or maybe they need a 5th semester to finish their associates, but not enough to be full-time, that's perfectly fine. Go ahead, have them officially declare their bachelor degree, get them, with student success to get that online and official prior to a semester starting, and then CPOS will be square with both programs going together. Fifth myth is that students lose all their financial aid if they're not full-time. So I touched on this a little bit when it comes to enrollment status. Yes, if a student is not full-time, they do not qualify for institutional financial aid. However, when it comes to the adjustments for CPOS or just in general, we do look at prorated amounts. So when you have a student and it's just unavoidable, they're going to be in 9 hours of required courses, it's still important for them to take 12 hours to get their institutional aid, and only their federal and state aid would be adjusted to the 9-hour amount. So you got to sometimes weigh, and this is more financial aid, sometimes we'll have to weigh and do the math depending on the student's aid. 9 times out of 10, if a student needs 9 hours, it will financially be better for them to still be full-time. And when it comes to that Pell or that Hope Scholarship, not being full-time, they're not losing the whole thing. They're just losing 1/4 of it in this scenario of 9 hours. So some tips and tricks, keeping this goal in mind of the 12 hours. And some of these will be a little repetitive, but some of the tips and tricks will apply to different scenarios, so I will repeat them because it's how I hear it. Mapping it out early. Y'all know this. Whenever we had to enforce CPOS more strictly the past couple years, it took a lot of people by surprise, and for people who were already seniors or juniors, for them it was sometimes too late to prevent having a semester where we had to take away some financial aid. So mapping it out early, planning it out early, those 12 hours per semester, doing that alone, you'll potentially save students thousands of dollars. And we know they like to change their minds. They change their majors, they add majors. As long as their active program is what they're seeking, that is what CPOS is looking at. So once they change their major, their previous classes wouldn't count under their current, but that's okay. That was previous year, previous semester. We run it, fresh each semester. So getting that major change in there as accurately, timely as possible will be to the benefit of the students. Same thing for adding minors. It comes out of the general elective hours. So if you get those in there, Jessica can get those on the program evaluations, and that lets financial aid see what the student is doing. When possible, save some gen eds for later years. Not all programs can do this. I know different departments have prerequisites to move through. But one thing, and I don't know when or how, maybe it's just that community colleges exist and that you do a lot of gen eds there. A lot of students come in with the misconception that they have to get all their gen eds out of the way and maybe do a few major classes, and then their last couple of years are heavier workloads of classes toward their major. So when I tell students, oh, you can save that Biology 101, you don't have to take it now, save it. Save math, you know, whatever. If as long as they're not worried about failing it, you can save it for that last semester. That I've seen, like, take weights off of students' shoulders. Like, oh, okay, it just hadn't even occurred to them that they can save that. That's a class down the road, you know for a fact is going to count for CPOS because it is required to graduate, right? Again, that's not going to help every student because sometimes they transfer in with associate's degrees, or they're seeking an associate degree first, or they come in with the dual enrollment. But that tip can help some. Another, this is more of a trick than a tip. This is when students are double majoring, or they would like to double major. If they're seeking both a BA and a BS degree, then their credit hours go up to 150. But if they're seeking one degree, but they're double majoring within a BA, their hours don't really go up. They just tend to usually graduate with more than 120. But the general electives, the major requirements, depending on how early they add that major, the major requirements take the place of those general electives. So if you have a student who, you know, they're going to dental school or X number of possibilities, and they need a number of their electives, and those electives will count toward their degree until you add that double major, just add that second major a little bit later. You can strategize it. You don't want to add it super late, but just timing of strategy can make a big difference, because financial aid is looking at a semester snapshot and leaving it to y'all to look at the 4-year plan. Another tip/trick is the concept of repeat coursework. So federal regulations allow students to have federal aid to repeat a class one time if they pass it. So if a student gets a D and they need a C for it to count toward graduation, they will still get their federal and state aid for that repeated course. So that repeated course can still be part of the base 12 hours. Now, if a student fails a course, at that point, financial aid is not limited. If they fail it 3 times, they can still have that federal and state aid for that 4th time. But if they pass it once, and they can have a repeat once of still getting paid for it. So if you're in a student's record, they're mapping out, and that last couple semesters they're lacking just a class or 2, look and see if they have some low grades. If they're open to taking the course again, technically the program requirement would be met, but also covered to have a repeat of one time. And that is per course, not per student. So they can repeat multiple things if they need to. That tends to be more of a last resort, just trying to fit those hours in for the 12 per semester. And for your overachievers, your high achievers, they're not gonna, you're not gonna retake courses that you've already got A's and B's in. But it's just out there as an option for some students. It could be beneficial. I've had this question asked to me a lot. I'll use myself as an example. I was a political science major, and I had met my minor requirements, met my major requirements, and I needed a class to be full-time spring of my senior year. I took neuropsychology. Had nothing to do with political science, but I just needed a class to be full-time, and it was covered. That is okay. It's okay if a student wants to take something out of left field just to be full-time. Their CPOS, financial aid, federal, state, will still be restricted to whatever is required, that 6 hours, 9 hours, whatever they have left. But 9 times out of 10, a student still needs to be full-time to get the maximum amount of financial aid we can give them. So a student may be confused, like, I can really take anything? Yes, you can really take anything. Go take 3 PE courses. Have some fun playing some tennis, racket sports, that's right. So that one seems to take students and faculty back sometimes, but if they have met everything, they just need to be full-time, they can take anything. They really can. And lastly, and most importantly, the number one tip when it comes to CPOS is to reach out to your friendly neighborhood financial aid department, okay? We are here to help. Maybe it's a myth I should have debunked in the last part that, we're not the bad guys, even though sometimes it may feel like it and the students may think that. We really try to let them know that we're not. We are here to help. When it comes to CPOS, it can get nitty-gritty specific, and we are here for that. We do the math for them either way. Is it better to take 6 hours? Is it better to take full-time? Because we can look at their charges, we can look at their individual aid eligibility and give them the answer that leaves the lowest bill coming out of their pocket. Especially, say a student is going into their final 2 semesters and they only need 18 hours. It may be better for them to be in 9 hours of required courses both semesters instead of having a 12 and a 6. So when it comes to that kind of specific layout of the math, that's when we encourage you all to encourage your students to talk to us. Because we can't tell you guys about their aid, we can talk to them about their aid. And for some students, they don't really have to worry about CPOS as much. Because it is federal and state, not all students qualify for all kinds of federal and state aid. So if they have a mostly institutional aid package, they may not see it as a big deal to only be in 6 hours of required courses. They'll still be full-time for their institutional aid. So that's really the key. So I will end on the goal, just to keep it fresh in your mind. The goal all the time is for students to register in at least 12 hours of required courses per semester. If they do that, they'll be golden. That's my spiel. See what time it is. I have a few minutes before I need to turn it over to Jessica. I'd love to hear from you all. Do you have questions, general or specific? Yes, so the question is, if a student transfers in a credit, how does the repeat coursework policies follow that course? The answer is that it follows the course with the student. So if a student transfers in with that credit, they can have 1 repeat of that course, wherever it may be. So at Carson-Newman, they would only have that 1 repeat left. That's a good question. And it's a distinction we have to make all the time in financial aid. So the question is, D often means fail at Carson-Newman. By federal definition, a D is passing. F is the only fail. Yes, that is correct. After a student has repeated coursework one time, if they do need it again, at that point, again, they may need to speak to us about additional loan options or speak to student accounts or about payment plan options. So yeah, if a student repeats a course and gets a lower grade, the HOPE scholarship, the state aid, will take that second lower grade, whatever the repeat one is. But as far as the aid coverage, it doesn't matter if they have a lower or higher grade with the repeated course.